Good morning. Good morning, Jamaica. Good morning to the diaspora. And, well, good afternoon to the diaspora in New York. This is Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We broadcast here from Kingston. We also broadcast from midday our time, 1 o'clock their time. We also broadcast in the New York tri-state area. We're at the beginning of the summer. And my God, the heat is unbearable. I'm just getting out of my car to come into the studio. My gauge was showing that the outside temperature was 87 degrees Fahrenheit. In another couple of weeks, it perhaps will be over 90. Now, I know that we have some tourist visitors who come here from cold states, places like Washington State and Colorado, Minnesota, where their summer temperatures are in the 50s and 60s. They probably find it delightful, but for people like me who have to live with it every day, it's unbearable. And of course, we're getting into the dry spell. So we're likely to encounter problems of water sources drying up and water lock-offs and shortage of water and that kind of thing. But that's Jamaica. We love it. We have to put up with some of these things that are peculiar to Jamaica because this is our piece of the rock. But this is Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. An idea that has been talked about here in Jamaica for a long time, although not intensely, is the possibility of having some form of unemployment insurance so that if for some reason you lose your job, you'd be entitled to some level of financial support to tide you over until you're able to start working again. The idea gained new currency, new traction with the impact of COVID. Many persons in regular employment found themselves without a job. According to Statin, the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, in the first year of COVID, that would have been 2020, some 78,000 people, actually 77,900 people, were displaced from their jobs. After 2 years of COVID, some amount of recovery was recorded, but the number of persons employed was still below what it was at the start of the pandemic. The government is exploring the possibility, and in particular the feasibility, of establishing an unemployment insurance scheme, and it has directed the PIOJ to undertake a detailed study to determine if it can be done and how it could be done. It is a noble idea. When someone loses a job or has to stop working, they still have to eat. The children still have to go to school. The rent or mortgage, the light bill, the water rates still have to be paid. But noble though the idea is, introducing it and implementing it are faced with many challenges. Who is going to benefit? People who work in the formal sector can easily be identified and located in terms of their place of work, what wages they're earning, the length of time that they have been employed, etc. But a substantial portion of people in Jamaica who have jobs from which they earn a living work in the informal sector. Many of the artisans, our carpenters and plumbers and electricians, technicians, our vendors, our truck drivers, they're not employ to anybody. They employ to themselves, but they work. They are employed. How would they be included? By some form of voluntary enrollment? That hasn't worked very well with the National Insurance Scheme. Very few of them join the NIS as voluntary contributors. The next question is, what are the circumstances that would qualify for the payment of unemployment insurance benefits? Would you be entitled to collect unemployment insurance if you resign your job? You weren't fired. The business didn't close down. You just decided you don't want that job anymore, so you resign. Would you be entitled to unemployment benefits? Would you be entitled to collect unemployment insurance if, not just resigning the job, but if, for example, you were dismissed from the job for cause? You know, you're not performing. Them catch your teeth in. Would you then qualify for unemployment insurance? How long would you have to have been employed before you can qualify? How long you'd have to be out of a job before you would be able to collect unemployment insurance benefits? These are questions that would have to be addressed from the beginning before you embark on the scheme. Then there's the question of how much unemployment insurance you'll be able to collect. Is it a flat sum, like the NIS, where it's pretty much a flat sum? I think something like what, $2,800 a week or something like that. Or is it going to be a percentage of what you normally earned? And if so, what percentage? Is it 50%, 60%? What would it be? Another question that would have to be addressed is, for how long would unemployment insurance be paid? For 1 month? For 3 months? For 6 months? I mean, it is presumed that while you're unemployed, you would be actively seeking to find another job. So how long would the unemployment insurance kind of help you out until you found that other job? And of course, the million-dollar question is, who is going to pay for it? Is it the worker? Is it the employer? Is it the government? Or is it a combination of the first two? Or all three? This is perhaps this question of how it is to be paid for is perhaps the issue on which the feasibility, the practicality of the idea will ultimately be determined. The person in the formal sector is already paying 5% of his wages, 2.5% to NIS, and I think 2% to NHG, so that would be 4.5%. His employer is paying 7.5% or 8%, because the employer, he pays 3% for NHD, but the employer also has to contribute, I think, another 3% to HEART, in addition to the 2.5% to NIS. So are these contributors, both the employee and the employer, are they going to have to make increased contributions to cover the cost of unemployment insurance? How much more would they have to pay? And how would that go down with the workers in particular, especially the lower income earners who are already struggling to live off what they are taking home after they take out the NIS and the NHT? It is what is left that they can carry home. Are they going to be willing to fork out another piece of that to support unemployment insurance. There are some wealthy countries that provide extremely generous unemployment benefits. In countries like Austria, Belgium, Finland is one, Germany is another. As long as you are unemployed, whether because you lost your job or you have not been able to find a job, so you are at home, as long as you are unemployed, you are entitled to unemployment benefits. In these countries, who pays for it? In Denmark, the full cost of unemployment insurance is paid for by the employees' contributions. So it is the workers who have to fund the scheme. In Spain, on the other hand, the workers pay 20% and the employers pay 80%. In Italy, you would have to be working for 2 years before you qualify for unemployment insurance. In France, on the other hand, you only have to be working for 4 months. In Switzerland and in France, if you lose your job, you can get unemployment insurance benefits of up to 70% of what you would normally earn if you were working. In Spain and in Japan, it is about 50%. So you get 50% of what your normal pay would be. In Sweden and in Portugal, you can collect unemployment benefits for up to 20 months. But in America and in England, it is only 3 months. So, you get it for 3 months, and after that you either find a work or you bata on your own. Where do the governments come in? A country like Denmark, which provides extensive social welfare benefits, they provide free health care. Hospitals don't charge anything. They provide free education up to university level, not just primary, secondary, all the way to university level, including postgraduate studies. But in order to provide all these things, they have very high tax levels. So, for example, income tax in Denmark is something like 45%. Here in Jamaica, it is, 25%. But in Denmark, they contribute 70% of the cost of unemployment insurance. If you go over to Japan, though, the government there only contributes 13%. Countries like Finland and Chile, they provide a fixed amount. It's not a percentage. They budget each year and they give a fixed amount, and they will increase it over time. But they provide a fixed amount. And after that, you have to work with what the employees and the employers contribute. Some countries like Austria, Belgium, I can think of Poland, Germany, they don't provide any contribution to the unemployment insurance fund. But if the fund runs into a shortfall, if the fund finds that what it is collecting from the employers and the employees cannot meet the payments that have to be made to persons when they lose their jobs, the government has given a commitment that they will make up the shortfall. So the business of unemployment insurance is very complex, very complicated. And how it would work, if indeed it can work, is very much affected by a country's peculiar economic and social circumstances. Over the weekend, I had a look at the economic profile of those countries that have implemented unemployment insurance schemes. The vast majority of them are at a more advanced stage of development and enjoy a higher per capita income than we do in Jamaica. There are only 3 exceptions that I found: Albania, Azerbaijan, and Mongolia. Does that mean that we shouldn't go there? I'm not sure. We're going to explore these issues today, and we have lined up some experts and some critical stakeholders to help us to better understand the complexities and the possibilities of unemployment insurance when we come back. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Unemployment insurance for Jamaica, that's what we're talking about today. And it's important, if we're going to discuss this issue, it's important to get the perspective of the workers' representatives, because they would have to be at the center of all of the discussion and consideration. And so we're very pleased to be joined by 2 leading trade unionists, Mrs. Helene Davis-Whyte, who is the president of the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, and Mr. Kavan Gayle, who is the president of the Bustamante Industrial Trade Union. I hope we have them both on the line. Mrs. Helene Davis-Whyte?
Yes, morning, Mr. Golding.
Morning. So good to have you back on the program. Are you there, Mr. Gayle, Senator Gayle?
Yes, I'm here. Morning, and morning to your listeners. Morning, Helene.
Morning, Kavan.
Thank you both. Let me pose the question. Unemployment insurance, is it an idea whose time has come, or are we being over ambitious? Helene, let me hear you first.
Well, I think we certainly believe that it is an idea whose time has really come. It has been on the table in various fora over the years, and, most persons have taken the view, that it is going to be difficult to implement, and as a result of that, not much action has been taken. It was actually put back on the table by virtue of recommendations coming out of the Labour Market Reform Commission, and again, I think with the onset of the pandemic and the number of workers that were dismissed, terminated as a result of the pandemic. So certainly the pandemic has brought it into sharp focus, the fact that there is a necessity for some kind of assistance to be provided to workers who have become unemployed, and therefore the discussions that are now taking place are something that the Confederation of Trade Unions really support.
Let me hear you, Kavan.
You ask if the time has come. You might want to consider how many times the time has come. So let's go back to the recession of 2009-2010. There was talk about it, and after that, the Labour Reform Commission, when it did its own study back in 2013, came out in 2017, there was a major recommendation towards this. And again, the economic shocks of the pandemic would have triggered this, because many workers would have lost their jobs either by way of redundancy, by way of layoff under the rubric of the law, or by those who would have exercised extended layoff. And, these unemployment insurance schemes, they play a very important stabilizing role that would support income security for those who may be unemployed or would have gone through a period of unemployment, or just by virtue of the shocks. So it's a means of compensating those for loss of earnings, and help them to break what we would consider as trade unionists, the negative cycle of unemployment that would force them to be in a state of reduced consumption. And the fact that we want workers to get some sort of a benefit. So it is something that the pandemic would have brought it back into sharp focus, the need for us to have discussions and deliberations around it and to confront the issue. Again, the time has come.
Let me provoke your minds, though, on a couple of issues. One is, when we embark on a consideration like this, how inclusive do we hope to be? The reason why I raised that, and I know both of you have a particular obligation to your union members, but I'm sure that both of you think more broadly in terms of the workers of Jamaica, whether they are union members or not. And part of the problem, we have found this with the National Insurance Scheme. When that was introduced in 1966, it was intended and the provision was made for people to join voluntarily. But if you look at the number of persons who are enrolled now in the National Insurance Scheme, don't hold me to the figure. Last time I looked at it, it was somewhere around 400,000. We have 1.2 million people employed, so it means that less than half of the workers are employed in circumstances that the NIS does not capture. If we're talking about unemployment insurance, are we confining ourselves to the NIS type of employee, or are we talking about something broader than that? Helene, let me hear you.
Is in fact that the scheme should actually cover persons who are employed. It would not cover persons who are self-employed. And so it would not deal with voluntary contributions into the scheme. And we have actually come to this point looking at other schemes that exist elsewhere, as well as the advice that we have gotten through the International Labour Organization. They are integrally involved in the discussions for us to get to the point of establishing an unemployment insurance. And it seems that the evidence suggests that, it's going to be difficult where someone is self-employed to be able to really determine, when they in fact become unemployed, and also in circumstances where persons resign their jobs voluntarily, whether or not they should actually be considered. Those are questions that have been looked at in other jurisdictions, and they have come down on the side of primarily having unemployment insurance schemes address persons who can be defined as being employed.
I see. The $1 million question, though, is who's going to pay for it, Kavan?
So it assumes a contribution on both sides, just like how you have the NIS. First of all, you were talking about a working population of 1.2, almost 1.3 million. And if you want to have a safety net, you want to at least capture all, but you want to have them registered in the scheme. And so the contribution would have to be on both sides, where the employer contributes and the employee contributes, just like the NIS.
Are your workers, are your members prepared to have us dip further into the little pay envelope that they're getting?
The fear that the worker has is one where if you dip into the pay envelope and you collect it, you must pay it over to the relevant authorities. And so that's a challenge that the worker has.
You see, one of the things, the reason I want to explore this with you is that if I'm one of your members now and I'm working, yeah, and I notice when I get my pay slip, it has the NIS deduction, it has the NHT deduction. I am kind of vexed because when I look at the NHT deduction, I apply several times and I can't get no benefit. But at least I know that at some point in the future, 7 years' time, I can get it back.
Right.
In terms of my NIS, I'm reasonably assured that when I get to a certain age, there's a little pension. It's not a fabulous pension, but there's a little pension that I'm going to get every fortnight. And if I know that if there are other benefits, if I run into an accident and I can't work anymore, there's invalidity and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to take out something more now for unemployment insurance, I mean, I've been in this job now for 10, 15 years and it's been going on very well. So you asking me to insure myself against a risk that I may not consider to be a real risk. And you want to take out money out of my pay for that.
And so that's how insurance goes. You are insured, and you are protecting against that risk of exposure. Now, at some point in time, it also assumes that you're going to get the money upon retirement. Maybe this scheme could be focused on that. But it also takes in that element.
Hold on. What are you saying? If I'm contributing to an unemployment insurance scheme, and I never have to claim any benefit because I work full time, never been laid off, never so on, until I retire, my contributions are those. Am I able to recover them, or are they gone into the fund?
And that's what we're saying. There must be a point in time to secure that contribution, because upon retirement it assumes that you're no longer employed.
Yes. But how would that work though? How would that work though, Helene? Because insurers will tell you that they collect from everybody in order to be able to pay out to those who have to claim. So everybody can get back, no?
Yeah, and that is some of what we are actually exploring, because in order to be able to encourage persons to want to contribute. And I agree that generally speaking, there are a lot of persons who will start buying into insurance because they prefer to accept the risk rather than to provide for that risk to be dealt with. But we are encouraging our members to see it as something that will actually assist them in their time of need. But as Kavan pointed out, bearing in mind, us wanting to encourage persons, we are exploring whether it would be possible for, some kind of payout to be made, once a person leaves employment, whether that is possible. We have not been able to get that information.
If not the full amount, a percentage of it.
Some percentage of it should be made
payable. But Kavan raised the question a while ago, the concern that workers have as to whether or not these deductions are being paid over. But beyond that, are you both satisfied with how the NIS funds have been managed? Let me tell you why I'm raising that. When I look at the yields for the fund and compare them to the yields for private pension funds, I see a disparity. Now, it may be that because these are quote-unquote public funds that the fund managers are more conservative, but do you think that more could have been done for NIS in terms of the management and investment? And is that something that you'll be concerned about in terms of any unemployment insurance fund?
So the funds in terms of the NIS is being managed, and I believe it is being managed effectively based on what goes in. Again, you spoke about a number, 400 and odd, maybe about 500,000 by now. The challenge that we're having is that that percentage of employees out of the total labor force that goes in, you have a number that is working on fixed-term contract, the precarious nature of employment that don't really contribute. And the fund right now needs more to contribute in order to make it more viable.
Well, the last time I looked at your numbers, and this is not something new, it is something that has been so for many years. what the fund is paying out now is more than what it is collecting in terms of contributions.
And
But
again,
that's
a different story.
yeah, but it remains afloat because of the income it earns from investments, no?
Right. That's essentially what is carrying it now. It is heavily invested.
Yeah.
And I think,
it takes on a proportion of, a payout upon retirement or whenever you have accident or the invalidity.
Well, that could be the subject of a whole long discussion that I'd love to have you both on, because when I look at the little pension benefits and the NIS, good God, I mean, I don't know. If you're going to a supermarket with that, you can't visit more than one aisle. Huh?
And I think that has been a concern, and that has been one of the reasons why there are persons who are self-employed who really don't consider it because when people hear of what is being paid out as pension, but again, that's an issue that came up in the report of the Labour Market Reform Commission, because they actually recommended that the two things should be separated, meaning the pension aspect and the other benefits should be separated. And their recommendation is that the pension scheme should be an official pension scheme, so to speak. And so therefore you're talking about contributions that are in keeping with what happens generally, which would be 5% for employer and another 5% for employee at the minimum, because the figures suggest that for you to get a good pension, you need to at least start with that base and aggregate 10% of salary contributed to a pension scheme. So their suggestion is that you should separate and have a fully fledged pension scheme as well as the other benefits that are allowed. I don't know that will actually be accepted, but it really was looking at whether the NIS benefits were relevant, and if they are not relevant, then persons would not want to actually contribute.
Have you both started a conversation with your rank and file to see what their response would be?
Certainly, well, from my perspective, we have actually not at rank and file level, but certainly at the officer level in our union been looking at it. And yes, the major concern that comes up is whether the salary can take another deduction. But one of the things that we are looking at in the discussions is, what percentage we would be looking at in terms of a contribution for unemployment insurance, and based on information that has been available from other jurisdictions, we are actually looking at less than 1% as we speak.
Less than 1% from the employee.
Well, aggregate employer and employee.
Oh, is that right?
That is what we are actually looking at now.
And tell me,
whether or not it can sustain is going to be the discussions going forward right now.
Sounds a bit low to me, but then I'm not an actuary. Tell me, what thought has been given to two questions? One is, how long do I have to be out of a job before I would qualify? And if I qualify, how long can I expect to receive the benefit before the benefit cuts off, which means that I have to be looking work in the meanwhile?
So it assumes in the first instance that you would be registered, and so you're contributing.
Uh-huh.
It also take into consideration the period of layoff up to the 120 days. The pandemic would have triggered a little further than the 120 days, because there were some employees. I'll give you an example. Those workers in the hotel and tourism industry, some of them decided that they would voluntarily go and lay off beyond the 120 days with the hope and anticipation that hotels would reopen and that they would get back the job. Now, those who would have stayed out there, they would have benefited if you had such a program. One of the things, though, that came at us in the consultation that we would have with that particular grouping is that, look here, me pay very small, you know, and it's difficult for me to be contributing again at doing the NIS, at doing the NHT, at doing the education tax. Somebody means that boy are paying the union dues. And plus the borrowing money. So the pay is small, and one of the things that we ought to look at for industries like those who are exposed to shock is really for them to have some minimum standard of earnings that are competitive, because right now you're having challenges in the hotel industry retaining hotel workers because they're looking elsewhere. That's a problem that we're facing. But then that's another discussion that we may have to have, Mr. Golding.
Well, one of the suggestions that I had put forward as in office, and we didn't get a great deal of traction on it, was amalgamating all of these deductions into a single one, and then allocating from that single deduction to the various purposes, whether that was housing or NIS pension. I had wanted to include healthcare, for example. At that time, I didn't have unemployment insurance on my radar, but I believe that is something that we really need to set it out on a table and say, now, how much can the workers bear for the protection that we want to provide them, how sustainable it is, and what coverage can we provide. We may have to trim back some, we may have to reconfigure some, but look like I'm going to have to invite you both back on the program so that we can discuss that and some other things.
Yes, so that approach is dependent, and it's always dependent on the percentage of your salary.
Yes.
Your total salary. And some of the agencies, we know that, they want to protect what they benefit from as a pool.
Well, education tax, I believe, should be removed from wages. That's my view. I mean, that's a general tax. And I believe that it should be treated out of the general taxation and consolidated fund. I believe that what comes out of a worker's salary ought to be related to specific benefits pertaining to that worker, peculiar to that worker.
That the workers can achieve.
Yeah.
That the workers can get more targeted. I support that.
Well, thank you both very much. We're going to have to come back to this, and I'm going to invite you back on when the matter seems to be gathering some more material around it and some more girth, so we can discuss it. Thank you both very much. Mrs. Helene Davis-Whyte, President of the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions. Mr. Kavan Gayle, President of the Bustamante Industrial Trade Union. We take a break. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Today we're discussing the idea of unemployment insurance. It's something that the government is giving some new focus on. And the government has tasked the Planning Institute of Jamaica with the responsibility for studying it, doing the due diligence to determine whether this is a bird that can fly. We're very pleased to welcome to the program Mrs. Deidra Coy, who is the Director of Human and Community Development at the Planning Institute of Jamaica. Mrs. Coy, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good morning.
I'm so glad to have you, but I will tell you straight up, I don't envy your job. How is it going?
Well, so far the feasibility is going well, but I just want to mention that discussions around unemployment insurance in Jamaica is nothing new. However, in 2017, the Labor Market Reform Commission recommended that a feasibility study for implementing unemployment insurance be done. And more recently, that recommendation was endorsed by the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Task Force. So the discussions, have been going on for some time, but we are just now going into the feasibility study.
One of the big... sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. I was just going to add that the feasibility study is being done with technical and financial support from the International Labour Organization, and we also have a technical oversight committee that provides that technical guidance, and that committee is actually tripartite in nature, consists of all the tripartite stakeholders, government, trade unions, employers, other private sector players, among others.
I had a look.
We have that engagement from early.
I had a look over the weekend. I had a look at those countries that do have some form of unemployment insurance, and one of the things that certainly would have caused me to think, if not discouraged me, is the fact that most of them are countries that are far more advanced than we are. I found only 3 countries with a lower per capita GDP than we have that have schemes going, and I was able to determine how well those schemes are going. The big question you're going to... There are several issues that I know that you are occupying your attention. I mean, who would qualify, what would the qualifications be, for how long would benefits be paid, what the amount of benefits, and so on. But a big question is, who's going to pay for it? Now, I'm prepared to presume that it's going to, just like NIS, it's going to have to be the employers and the employees. When I was talking to 2 eminent trade union leaders a while ago, Mrs. Helene Davis-Whyte and Mr. Kavan Gayle, Mrs. Davis-Whyte suggested, and she was very cautious in the suggestion, said that they were looking at a combined contribution of 1% of payroll. But I suggested to her that I don't think 1% is going to cut it. How are we going to pay for this thing?
Okay, so as far as the funding or the source of funding for unemployment insurance, that's just one of several key parameters that we'll have to consider in the design of any scheme that may be implemented. And it will be contributory in nature, so similar to the NIS. As a matter of fact, unemployment insurance or any kind of unemployment benefit is usually a part of the social security system in the country. In this case, it would be NIS for Jamaica. So it would not be a separate deduction, so to speak. One possibility is that it could be rolled into the national insurance scheme. And so that would, of course, entail an increase in NIS contributions in order to support that additional benefit.
Yeah, because bear in mind,
the employer-employee.
Bear in mind, for the last 10, 20 years, the NIS contributions are less than the NIS payouts. They make up the difference, of course, with yield from investments. So I take your point that it would have to be an increase, but are we likely to run into a big pushback from workers, though? Have you done any kind of sounding to see how, particularly workers at the lower income earning level, can they afford to give up any more of the little envelope that they collect on a Friday?
So that's one of the good things about this study and the approach that we've taken. It's very consultative, and as I mentioned before, we have all the tripartite stakeholders actively engaged from the very start. So Mrs. Helene Davis-Whyte and Senator Gayle, for instance, are on that technical oversight committee because we have to get the views of the workers which they represent, and even those that they may not directly represent, because they have their ear to the ground. So we have engaged them from the very beginning to get that kind of feedback. And yes, we know it will be difficult as far as any kind of additional deduction or contribution, but we have to have a balance, and ultimately that will be a decision for Cabinet to make if we implement unemployment insurance. And so the study that we're doing, the findings and any recommendations will be presented to Cabinet for a decision.
One of the big challenges that we have to face, and I'm sure you're mindful of it, is the fact that so much of our economy is informalized. You look at some of the other countries with robust unemployment insurance schemes where, 90% of their workers are in the formal economy. In Jamaica, we have a working population, employed population of 1.2 million. But the number of persons who are actually enrolled and contributing to NIS, which would give you some kind of reflection of the formal economy, that is less than 500,000. So more than half of our workers are outside of the capture, that NIS is able to exert. We're likely to face the same situation with unemployment insurance. Do we give up on the other 55% who, these are the electricians, the plumbers, the artisans, the cab drivers. They may face a problem too where, the taxi that I drive in mash up. I didn't have enough insurance coverage to replace it. So for the next couple of months, I don't earn any money. I have children to feed. But I am not covered by an unemployment insurance scheme. I gather from what Mrs. Davis-Whyte said that you're not contemplating something similar to what NIS does, which is where they encourage people to contribute voluntarily. I don't know if that's a fixed position. But isn't one of the challenges that we have that it's difficult to be inclusive when our economic framework is not inclusive? So much of the economy and economic activity is outside of the formal system. Isn't that a difficulty that we face?
Yes, it is a difficulty that we face. So as far as any possible exclusion of informal workers is not unique to Jamaica if we are to implement an unemployment insurance scheme. That's actually what's done in other countries. So what we would have to consider is other policy directives as far as that transition from informality to formality. So work being done by the Ministry of Labour and Social Security would come into play as far as getting more informal workers, into the formal economy or to become formal workers. Work being done by other ministries, departments, and agencies to improve formality within the economy would come into play in a situation like this. And any other communication strategy that the Ministry of Labour is employing as far as getting more, increasing coverage of the NIS and more contributors into the NIS. But it is a difficulty we face. And actually the cost assessment that has been done, which was looking at what is actuarially feasible, did also consider that. So the exclusion of informal workers, possibly self-employed workers, was also considered in the cost assessment.
But Barbados' national insurance scheme has an employment benefit component. Has your team been able to look at their program to see how it has worked? Because they are perhaps as closely comparable to us as I can think of.
Yes, we have looked at both the Bahamas and Barbados, which are the only two Caribbean countries or CARICOM countries with an unemployment insurance scheme. So we have looked closely at both countries, how it works in both, and we have been able to get some ideas from both countries as far as what Jamaica could implement or could put in place, changes that we would make, things that we could do differently. So we have looked at both as well as other countries in the Latin America and Caribbean region and elsewhere.
How is the study going? And how soon you think you're going to be in a position to present to the government some findings and recommendations?
Right. So we hope to present to Cabinet in about a month or two at the latest.
So soon?
So, yes. We started the study in May of last year, and so we are wrapping up now. We're actually in the third phase of the project, which is the development of operational and legislative framework, which would lay out the roadmap to Cabinet should they decide to implement unemployment insurance scheme. So it would present to them what would be needed to put in place institutionally and otherwise for a sound unemployment insurance scheme or benefit.
And you mentioned that you're getting technical support from the ILO.
Yes, we are.
Because I know they have a wealth of knowledge and experience in dealing with schemes like these.
Yes, they do. And even for the cost assessment, a lot of the key parameters for the design, we were guided by the minimum international standards as set out by the ILO. So other key parameters such as who will be covered, the qualifying conditions, the benefit rate, so what percentage of the previous average earnings would be paid as a benefit, the benefit duration, which by ILO standards, the minimum is 13 weeks of benefit payment, or it could be 26 weeks, the disqualifying conditions. So when I speak about disqualifying conditions, in addition to the social protection element of unemployment insurance, which is that income security aspect, there is also a labor market component, or rather unemployment insurance is complemented by active labor market policies. So that promotion of employability, skills development, and critically, the reintegration of the unemployed to the labor market is a key component of any unemployment insurance scheme. So it's not just about paying out a benefit. We also want to improve their skills and reintegrate them into the labor market as quickly as possible.
Well, that's what I wanted to raise that issue with you, and it's interesting that you mention it because there some employment casualties result from technological changes. Have you factored into the program some kind of you mentioned the word a while ago, retraining, so that we could make them re-employable?
Correct. Right. So we have started. We have looked at and continue to look at how we can work with the Heart NSTA Trust to bring in that skills development and retraining, retooling components of the unemployment insurance to make them more employable and to reintegrate them into the labor market in some way.
Well,
so that is something we are looking at.
Well, I certainly look forward to hearing the results of your effort once it gets to Cabinet, and Cabinet is inclined to share it with the public. I look forward to looking at it with great intent. Thank you very much, Mrs. Deidra Coy, Director, Human and Community Development at the PIOJ, who is the lead head honcho in terms of looking at unemployment insurance. Can it work? And if it can work, how would it work? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
Yeah, we're up on the noon break. We'll be back right after the noon activities. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Today we're discussing the issue of unemployment insurance, the work that's being done by the Planning Institute of Jamaica to examine the feasibility. We got viewpoints from two noted trade union leaders, Mrs. Helene Davis-Whyte and Mr. Kavan Gayle. We want to get a perspective now from Dr. Damien King, who is an economist, lecturer in economics at the University of the West Indies. He's also executive director of CAPRI. We want to get his analytical perspective. Dr. King, are you there? Not online yet. We're trying to see if we can connect with Dr. Damien King.
Hello.
Damien, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, sir.
Tell me, unemployment insurance, are we hanging our hat where we won't be able to reach it, or have we grown tall enough that we can stretch and get it down?
Well, unemployment insurance is to be seen in the context of a social safety net. That is to say, it is part of a society's architecture of how to cushion the consequences of adverse developments to households and sectors of the economy. Now, we already have something in place that serves that purpose. The labor laws oblige companies to pay what we here call redundancy if somebody is dismissed without cause. and it specifies after so many years of work, you owe so many weeks of redundancy. That accomplishes the same thing. It is to tide over somebody who becomes unemployed without cause until they have time to find another job. So what redundancy does is it imposes the cost of temporary unemployment on the individual business. Unemployment insurance tries to meet that same objective by socializing the cost, by having either all businesses collectively or, more likely, the tax-paying public take over that cost. So the first thing to ask is to recognize that the contemplated unemployment insurance makes redundancy redundant. So people need to analyze it in that context, that this is a replacement for redundancy and not workers are going to get paid twice.
Are the trade unions
in the same circumstances?
Are the trade unions aware of that? Have they accepted that? That didn't come up in my discussions with them. I'm sorry, it didn't occur to me to raise it.
I'm sure they didn't bring it up.
But what are you saying? We can't have it both ways, huh?
Well, there's no reason to have it both ways.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to pay for the same thing twice.
But in the discussions with them as well, and even with Mrs. Coy from the PIOJ, nobody mentioned the question as to whether or not the taxpayers would foot this bill. I got the impression we're talking about employee and employer contributions, very much the way in which NIS is now funded.
Okay, so, I mean, that doesn't change the argument. It means that we are now having the employers, we are now having the imposing another cost on the labor market.
Yes, as a matter of fact, and to strengthen my understanding of that, when I raised the question as to whether or not, what about those persons who are outside of the formal system? And we have less than 500,000 people in the NIS.
Well, I'm coming to that.
So and they accepted that those that are outside of that formal system, well, they're on their own. They're not contemplating that they would benefit from this scheme at all.
Yeah, I'm coming to that though. So let me just finish with the issue here that this has to be contemplated as a replacement for the cost of redundancy, which is already a burden on the labor market. And we have to be careful that if we don't view it as a replacement, if we view it as an addition, then we are once again burdening the labor market with more costs of formality. As it is, when you add up income tax and education tax and NIS and NHT and
HART,
when you add all of that, it represents a tax on the formal labor market of 43.75%. Let's round it up to 44%.
As much as that?
Yes. It's 44% of the labor market, of the wage bill. And it doesn't really matter which side of that market you think you're levying the tax on, It doesn't matter whether you specify in your legislation that employees pay it or employers pay it. It represents a tax on formal employment. So before we shift to the problem of informality, recognize that the reason why we have a problem of informality is because we heavily tax formal employment. Informality is not an accident of nature. It's a result of economic choices. It's an outcome.
What are your options, though?
So if we are going to impose this unemployment insurance as another tax, as a further burden on formal employment, then once again we are increasing the incentive for both employees and employers to have part of their labor force be informal. So we need to think this through carefully. And in that context, you have already pointed out that with such a large share of the economy being informal, this doesn't help them at all. So this is a kind of a welfare social safety net for those who are relatively better off. Not well off by any means, but the ones who are worse off are the ones who are hustling, who are informally employed.
Are you suggesting that the basic concept is wrong and that we really ought to look at a publicly funded social safety provision and take the burden off the labor market? Is that what you're saying?
Well, certainly, at least that. At least take the burden off of the formal labor market. But once we do that, then we come to a second question, which is in contemplating how to adjust our social safety net for it to be effective, the social safety net that's funded out of the budget. Should we not be focusing on the poorest and neediest, the bottom 25%, rather than those who are formally employed, which by and large are not those in the bottom 25%. So rather than just, there's a thing we're doing Jamaica sometimes that we call see it and like it. So we travel abroad, we travel to Miami and New York, and we see something unlike it, and we try to just plant it here. We just have to think carefully whether unemployment insurance is an example of see it and like it, and we have really thought through whether it addresses a problem we have here and addresses it in the way that is effective here.
But aren't we looking at two separate challenges, though? The person in the informal sector, the person who washes cars, and I may wash 15 cars today, tomorrow I only get 3 to wash. I run into a problem every now and again. So I don't earn. And I may need some kind of social intervention. But you take somebody now who works in a factory somewhere, in a store somewhere, in an office somewhere. They may run into a problem where, for whatever reason, maybe technological changes, not for cause, not for anything they did wrong, but they lose their job. They may argue a strong case and say, I need something that will tide me over, whether it is for the 13 weeks that I hear is being contemplated, so that I can jump around and find something else. But in the meanwhile, I need to pay the light bill, I need to eat some food, I need to send the kids to school, I need to pay the rent. And we're looking at two separate things there.
Indeed, and when you put it in that context, it really makes the case for why there needs to be a social safety net. And that social safety net might include unemployment insurance. As I started out at the top saying that, so now we take care of the issue of tiding over somebody who is unemployed through no fault of their own by imposing that cost on the business. And it's not really the business's problem.
Well, why do you say that?
There's an argument for socializing that cost and imposing it on the rest of the society through unemployment insurance.
Well, why should you impose it on me? I don't have nothing to do with that business.
Well, we impose it on you because what insurance does is it anticipates that it could happen to any of us. And so all of us pay a little bit.
But I'm a pensioner. It can't happen to me, so why should I have to pay for it?
Well, this is true, but there's no way to exempt pensioners from general taxation.
No, that's right. But what you want to do is to impose a tax on me for a company that, whether through bad management or whatever it is, somebody loses their work. Why shouldn't that company bear that cost?
Because, well, there are a couple of reasons. A lot of the reasons why the person becomes unemployed has nothing to do with the company. But more importantly, is it ends up harming the labor market. It ends up harming the people it is intended to help. Because when you impose a cost to get rid of a worker, that makes businesses more reluctant to hire the worker in the first place. And we find consistently when we look at international data that the countries that have the highest, what is called exit costs, the cost of getting rid of workers, are the ones that have the highest rates of unemployment, because exit costs make people reluctant to hire.
So how do you, what would you say to the countries now, the Germanys and the Italies and the Finlands of this world and the Spain that have unemployment insurance schemes, and this is funded primarily by workers and employers? There are some countries where the government makes a contribution. There are some countries where the government doesn't make an automatic contribution, but if it runs into a deficit, the government underwrites the deficit. What is it that they know different from what we are trying to contemplate here?
Well, there are also countries where the government funds it entirely out of general taxation. No, in a context where a large percentage of your labor force are formally employed, it's an important part of the social safety net because it is better to socialize that cost, spread it across a large swath of the economy rather than imposing it on a single business. So the context is different, and it serves as an important part of the social safety net without impairing the willingness to hire.
But in this social safety net concept that you are talking about, you're not just talking about unemployment insurance. I'm sure you'll be talking about the NIS type benefits and so on, wouldn't you?
Indeed, and PASS, which is a critical part of our social. PASS is the most effective part of our social safety net. And if we're going to be talking about ways to improve the social safety net, they should be spending all of their time trying to find ways to widen it and deepen it.
To include unemployment insurance?
Well, I'm not sure it includes unemployment insurance. I'm just saying that that it is understandable to be a little impatient about talking about the parts of the social safety net that don't benefit the poorest and neediest.
Now, what you're saying is that unemployment insurance is not one of those.
It's not one of those because unemployment insurance only benefits those who are formally employed over a long term.
Yes.
Which pretty much excludes most of the bottom, quartile.
So, are you basically saying it's an idea whose time has not come, or whose time perhaps should never come?
It's an idea that is not as beneficial in our particular context as it is where it exists. And if you are going to do it, then recognize that it is a replacement for the obligation to pay redundancy costs. You
keep saying that, but I didn't get I didn't get that coming out of the discussions I had before. So I kind of got the impression that people are looking at this as an incremental benefit.
But of course, those who are going to benefit are not going to bring up anything but the context of an incremental benefit.
Yeah.
But why would you pay twice for the same thing?
Yes. Well, I believe though. I believe based on what Kavan Gayle was saying though, in relation to the tourism sector in particular, is that there's a 120-day period, I think, before severance pay is due, before you can claim it if you are laid off temporarily. But during that period, the unemployment insurance would provide you with some relief. So he may be looking at it as not necessarily in place of, but to cover a period of economic setback where redundancy payment would not have applied.
Well, seasonal workers are a particular case. And seasonal workers are an issue really of the personal financial planning. Seasonal unemployment doesn't come as a surprise,
Has CAPRI done any study on it, on unemployment insurance?
No, we haven't.
Have you done anything on the social safety net issue, broader?
We have indeed published quite a comprehensive report last year looking at the entire social safety net, all of the elements of it, and which are the ones that hit the target and which are the ones that missed the target.
Which are the ones that you feel we have missed the target on?
Well, for example, the zero rating of GCT items is one that widely misses the target because most of that tax expenditure benefits those who are better off, because those who are better off spend more on everything. So the return on that in terms of meeting the target is very low, compared to something like PASS, where nearly all of the money meets the target. So to just give you one example, when you zero rate a food item, a lot of households in Cherry Gardens and Millsboro consume that same food item generally in greater quantities. But none of the households in Cherry Gardens and Millsboro Crescent are on PASS.
Mm-hmm.
So you really want to. So that's an example of how much of the cost actually reaches the target. So that's the kind of analysis we did, and PASS was the big winner. And that is actually consistent with a lot of international evidence that shows the benefit of cash transfer programs, of which PASS is an example.
And that's a straight budgetary provision.
Yes.
How do you prevent abuse of it, though? I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day who lives in Florida.
Yeah.
And who was telling me about the kind of checks that they were collecting for COVID relief. More than they ever earned. The study that you did, were you able to track, even to do a sampling to see whether or not the program is being abused, whether people who used to be in need of that assistance are really no longer in need but continue to enjoy the benefit?
Well, you're not going to get 100% perfect targeting with any welfare program. But what we did find was that the percentage of it that meets the target was far higher for PASS than for any other welfare program, such as zero rating items, such as the NHT, and we pretty much examined everything that is justified as part of the social safety net or promoting those for the needy. We did a separate analysis of the extent to which COVID relief reached the neediest and the most vulnerable.
What you found?
Found that missed the target entirely.
Is that right?
When we surveyed residents of the most vulnerable communities in urban and rural areas, 3/4 of them received no support whatsoever from the private or public sector.
So where are the 350,000 people that were supposed to have benefited?
Well, they were not the residents of the poorest and most vulnerable communities.
What you saying to me?
Well, I mean, to some extent, that was in the design, because parts of the program were intended for those who were for small businesses who were registered and those who were formally employed. So a part of it was by design, but nonetheless, it exposes what COVID and our research exposed was that our general social safety net remains weak, and we need to put something in place so that the next time we have a crisis like a pandemic or something get unforeseen, that it automatically kicks into place and supports those who are the neediest.
Tell me before we wrap up. Tell me in the discussion, study, due diligence, call it what you will, that's being done on this idea of unemployment insurance. Has the university in general, yourself in particular, have you been reached out to in terms of commenting?
No, I haven't, but that is not so. That, by itself is not to suggest any faultiness in the methodology. The Planning Institute is really quite capable of doing the desk and the foot, the footfall research, the walking the streets research to get the required information. It doesn't really require reaching out to any particular individual at the university.
Mm. Well, an interesting perspective that you have raised. I wish I'd had you on the program earlier, because it would have influenced some of the questions that I would have put to my guest that I had on earlier. But thank you so much, Dr. Damien King, Executive Director of Caribbean Policy Research Institute, lecturer at the university. Thank you so much, Damien.
Okay, thank you.
We've been talking about unemployment insurance. Let's link now with Beauregard in New York, because they have unemployment benefits up there. I gather they have a limit, though. You can only go for 3 months. Beauregard.
Good afternoon, Mr. Golden.
If you lose your work at Irijam today, don't the government step in and help you with some money?
Maybe if I file for unemployment, yes.
Yes, and for how long you can get it?
I'm not sure. I haven't gone through that process before. I'm here now.
Oh, we don't.
One year. 1 year. I'm being told it's 1 year.
What are you saying to me?
Yes, 1 year.
Is that right? I thought it was limited to 3 months.
No, I just got that info from the producer.
The government is contemplating it here, and they have asked the Planning Institute of Jamaica to do the necessary study and research and consultation. I spoke with Mrs. Deidra Coy, who is the person at the PIOJ, who is the lead person on it. And she says that they've been at it from May last year, and they hope to be able to submit a report to Cabinet in another month. I spoke with some union leaders earlier, and they are, of course, very supportive. But I just had a discussion, you may have listened in on it, with Dr. Damien King.
Yes.
Who believes that we're taking the wrong approach, that we're seeking to provide a kind of social safety net for people who that's not aimed at the people who need it the most, right? And he's suggesting that we really should look at a comprehensive social security safety net program that would include unemployment insurance, but would be really targeted at the people who struggle,
Yes.
He's concerned that this is discouraging employment of people, and it is forcing people to find other ways than employing people. And their big complaint in Jamaica, for example, is that many employers are now employing people through contracts, so that they don't pay no NIS, no. A lot of security guards, for example, find that if car lick them down on the road, there's no compensation, no invalidity benefit they can get from NIS, because no contributions are being deducted and no contributions are being made by the employers, because they are private contractors. So what he's saying is that we must ease some of the pressure off the labor market and basically spread it on the entire population, so that we would fund a lot of this through our general taxes. But then many people will say, well, we're paying plenty taxes already, we can't pay no more, no?
True indeed. And this is a very good topic for the people here in the diaspora, because people here are very concerned about the issues that their family and friends are facing in Jamaica, and this unemployment is definitely one of them. So for you to have this topic today, I believe that the whole entire tri-state is locked in and ready to hear what you have to talk about.
Well, we're perhaps going to have to come back to it once the PIOJ has submitted its report and the government chooses to make the report public. It probably will be taken to Parliament as a green paper for discussion. So at that time, we perhaps have to come back to it, and perhaps we'll ask you to help me to try and identify some people over there who we can talk to, who would have had the experience. In New York, for example, of people losing their job for whatever reason. They have the rent to pay, they have the kids to send to school. I'd love to hear, for example, if you were earning $800 for the week and you lose that job, how much unemployment insurance would pay you? How much of that $800 do you get, and to what extent is that sufficient to take care of the rent and the kids and so on. I mean, it's going to be important and useful, I think, to have that sort of discussion. So we may want you to help us line that up when that time comes.
That wouldn't be a problem, sir.
Good. Beauregard, thanks a whole lot.
All right, no problem.
Keep the flag flying up there.
Always.
Yeah, okay. You want to take a break now? Yeah, let's take a break. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Today we've been talking about unemployment insurance, looking at the various, looking at it from different angles, all of the issues involved. And we've been getting a variety of viewpoints. We started with the trade union leaders. We spoke with Mrs. Deidra, who is the person at the Planning Institute of Jamaica that's leading the study that the government has commissioned. We just had a discussion with Dr. Damien, who has a very interesting perspective. But ultimately, the unions talk about it as being a necessary safeguard for the workers who become casualties of, economic circumstances. Dr. King spoke about it as basically a social safety net intervention, and he believes that we ought to approach it from that perspective rather than seeking to impose further financial burden on the labor market, which he considers to be what we'll be doing. He feels that NIS, NHT, education tax, art trust, all of those things constitute a tax on the formal labor market. But ultimately, it's going to come down to some numbers that have to be crunched to see how it would work, what it would cost, who would pay for it, what the benefits would be, and whether the benefits are commensurate with the imposition that would be made, whether it is on the workers and on employers or on the government, in order to keep it going. And somebody we're very anxious to talk with is someone who can give us a kind of actuarial, put it in an actuarial framework and give us some idea. It's based on our particular circumstances here, but I'm sure drawing on the experience of other countries where it has been implemented. And I'm very pleased to welcome to the program Mr. Willard Brown. He's the Executive Vice President at Sagicor, to help us to try and get a better understanding of what it is we're talking about and what we can expect. Mr. Brown?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Golden.
I'm so glad to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Unemployment insurance. Is it something that we can afford to contemplate, or we should put it off until another time?
Well, I think it's something we should certainly look into implementing. It's something that we have been discussing. This is not a new discussion in Jamaica. I've been hearing about unemployment insurance, investigating it for at least 10, 20 years. I believe, as Dr. King said, I didn't hear the interview with him. I just listened to what he said. It can be considered a social safety net. And I have to tell you, the world of economists is split down the line regarding unemployment insurance, whether it's a good thing that plays an important stabilization role during economic slowdown, or whether it's just one more thing that works against the economy. And depending on which economist you talk to, you'll get a different view. Some countries have implemented it, not on a wide scale, I would say. So, for example, in the Caribbean, it's only Barbados and Bahamas, I believe, have a contributory unemployment insurance scheme. And you find a higher participation rate in more developed countries.
One of the concerns, and it seems to me that you're alluding to it, one of the concerns that I have, and which I raised from the very start of the program, was the fact that so much of our workforce is outside of the formal system. We have 1.2 million people who are employed, but less than 500,000 of those are contributors to NIS, which could give you a kind of picture of how many people are in the formal, are in the capture stage. In other words, these are the persons who, if you're talking about a contributory program, these are the same persons who will be covered. Right. So we are, in fact, again, pursuing an idea that would exclude a lot of people. And I think Dr. Damien King's point was the people who need this kind of intervention the most are not the ones who are now contributing to NIS. It is the ones that are outside.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why he felt that we perhaps need to look at a broader net. But then he's saying something that I'm not sure will go down with a lot of people, that shift the burden of that from the payroll deduction into general taxation.
Well, let's be honest, nobody wants to pay extra taxes, right? But the issue is to offer this kind of what I call a social safety net, which can help with economic activity, by the way, in periods of downturn. There is a cost. Now, I don't want to mix up how far we spread the net, the contribution rate net, with the fact that there actually has to be a contribution rate. If you restrict it to the traditional labor markets and not include the informal, then the reality is it is only that base that will be covered. So we start with what do we really want. Ideally, we want to be able to cover everybody, but we have to be able to capture a reasonable contribution rate from the people who are being covered.
Well, what he cited, Mr. Brown, and I wanted to interject here. What he cited was, he says that because we are putting so much imposition on the labor market, why employers are now finding creative ways to employ the labor that they need, so they enter into contracts. I mean, the security guards is perhaps the most common example, but there are others. And he's saying, if you now increase the current contributions, wage-related contributions, beyond what it is now, which is already heavy, what he's saying is that what you're doing is that you're forcing them to avoid the formal labor market even more, and to find other ways now to hire the people that they need. In other words, he's saying that, you're chasing a dwindling market if you keep going this way.
And there is some truth to that, because let's be honest, you will always have employers who will try to reduce the cost of production. And if they can reduce the cost of production by lowering the labor cost, then I'm sure some employers will investigate this or go that route. But we have the flip side, that we also need to find a way to protect our employees or people who work in a period of economic downturn. Now, which one will weigh more? It depends on who you ask, and it depends on the time you ask them. Because in a period of economic downturn where unemployment is high, there will always be people who will be wishing, boy, I wish we had unemployment insurance to help us with this cycle. So I don't have a perfect answer for you, but those are two, I'll call it polarities.
But in terms of the implementation,
right?
I mean, I'm trying to see if I can find a way to bridge the gap between what the unions are expecting and are proposing and what Dr. King is saying. Let us say, for example, that if I work at Sagicor, then every month or every week, depending on how I'm paid, my pay slip shows that their deduction has been made and Sagicor has made their contribution, and presumably it is paid over to the relevant authority, no? So it's captured. It's captured. But let us say that I am a plumber. I don't have a fixed place of employment, but I walk around with a card and I circulate it as much as possible. I get a call. Mr. Willard Brown said I have a pipe that's leaking, so I go to Mr. Willard Brown and I fix the pipe. And I charge him $4,000 and he pays me. I'm not contributing to anything. Let us say that we hit an economic downturn and fewer people are calling me to fix pipe. They prefer the pipe go on dripping because they can't afford the $4,000 to fix it. How would I be able to claim unemployment insurance? I can't claim it. Can I?
Only if one out of two things had happened. One is that even people in the informal sector can contribute to state social security schemes. There are the cards that you can go and collect and make the payment. Most people don't.
Yeah, but you know that doesn't work with NIS.
Exactly, but that has not been a fault of the NIS.
Yeah.
Right. So there are ways that people can contribute and collect.
But how do I establish that I am unemployed? I mean, if I lose the work at Sagicor, that is a matter of that's a question of fact that can easily be established.
Right.
But if I'm a plumber and the plumbing work not going on so well, how am I going to establish that?
That one, I think, is one of the reasons why this thing has been so hard to implement for certain categories. The simple answer is I'm not sure how you would be able to demonstrate a drop in income in a period of economic downturn if you don't have a formal job. I simply do not know.
Yeah, well, I would go further. I would say that there is no scheme that is going to have the flexibility to cover you. I mean, I'd go as far as saying that.
You mean me, the plumber?
Yeah, the plumber. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you give another example. But in certain countries, for example, in Barbados, I believe, they actually, even though they have unemployment insurance, they actually introduced an additional level to deal with the lower income people during periods of economic downturn, because they realize that a raw contributory unemployment insurance is simply may not be enough to provide a wide enough coverage, certainly for the more vulnerable parts of society. So it's all these things need to be taken into consideration to really come up with a program. And I want to add one other thing. Unemployment insurance, really, it won't achieve the aim if all it is collecting contributions or tax or whatever and making a payment. No, it has to be broader than that. It has to be something that encourages employability, and it has to be something that certainly encourages people to look for work when they're unemployed.
Yes.
All of those three things have to come into play.
And I'm sure you would include retraining in that too.
Yes, yeah, man. So when I said improving employability, all of those things that I was talking about, it is that framework that has to be built to have a really sensible unemployment insurance.
In other words, you can't stay home and wait for the unemployment check to come.
You cannot. That would fail.
Well, Mrs. Coy says she hoped to complete this study and submit the report to Cabinet by next month. I'm surprised that it will be ready so soon because, well, she said they've been at it from last year May, so I perhaps shouldn't say that. I'm anxious to see what it proposes. The NIS, as much as it has been a lifesaver for some people, the NIS is so inadequate. I mean, the maximum benefit of a NIS is less than $3,000 a week. And somebody, a cynical person may say, instead of talking about unemployment insurance, what you really ought to be doing is to look to see what do we need to do to make NIS more relevant and more beneficial, no?
I actually think that they should continue focusing on both. The NIS, I know, would certainly love to widen the net of contributors. I've heard some of those discussions before. And yes, the benefits are seemingly low, but that depends if you take into consideration the level of payments that are made.
Yeah.
Are the benefits low in relation to the contribution rate? And I would say no, not really. So, I mean, it's all of these things that need to be taken into consideration. We're making judgment on these social security schemes.
Well, it's a discussion that I believe is going to have to continue, because it is important, but as to whether or not, if I were calling the shots as to whether or not I would consider it to be the most important intervention that needs to be made in terms of workers and their well-being. I'm not sure, but my mind remains open on it.
That's all we can offer at this point.
Yeah.
Open mind.
Yeah. Mr. Willard Brown, Executive Vice President at Sagicor, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up the discussion now on this question of unemployment insurance. And we're going to be talking with Mr. Chen. Now, Wayne is the chairman or president of the Caribbean Employers Federation. So he would be able to bring to us a perspective, not just in terms of Jamaica, where he lives, but also what is happening in the other Caribbean countries. We've heard during the discussions on this program, we heard about the unemployment insurance scheme that exists in Barbados that I knew about before, but then we also heard that there's one in the Bahamas too. I wasn't aware of that one, where they do have an unemployment insurance scheme. But I think Dr. Damien King's intervention is something that keeps hitting me back in the forehead, because whether or not in the conceptualization, whether we have given enough attention to what impact this is going to have on the labor market. In other words, what Dr. Damien King was saying is that we're making it more and more expensive for employers to hire people. And is that necessarily what we want to do? We have Mr. Chen on the line. Wayne, welcome to the program.
Hello, Mr. Golding.
How are you?
Can't complain. Up in cool Mandeville.
Yeah, that's good. Unemployment insurance. It's something I've been talking about for a long time. It seems to be gathering some momentum now, certainly in terms of government's exploratory approach. And I've had a talk with the union leaders who believe that it's an idea whose time has come several times before and we have missed it. But I had a talk, I don't know if you're able to hear the discussion I had with Dr. Damien King, and he raised some concerns that I believe we can't just brush aside. He says we are making it more and more expensive for people to employ workers. He quoted a figure. He says right now it's something like 48%. I don't know where you got that figure from, but
I think he put in the PAYE without taking out the
probably yes.
Because cumulatively, when we add the different payroll deductions, it has resulted in two things. It has resulted in the high cost of formal employment. It has caused a high degree of informality. But also critically, it has caused a drift towards contract work.
Yes.
As a workaround Jamaica's high cost of payroll deduction. So I understand the sensitivity to add another cost. But the fact is that a part of why contract work has become so attractive, and a part of why a lot of people work informally, is the high cost of redundancies. And I think Damien has made the point that if we were to introduce unemployment insurance, you would have to simultaneously review and remove the redundancy law.
No, he was very clear on that. He was very clear. He said you can't pay twice for the same thing.
Absolutely, and he's quite correct.
But tell me now, I'm sorry I wasn't seized of that angle when I had the trade union leaders on, because I don't know, do the trade unions understand that you can't have both?
We have had the discussions, and when I say we, this has come up at the Labour Advisory Council many times in the past. It's a black eye to Jamaica, because when I looked at the Barbadian situation, Barbados passed the law in 1981. So they have long history with it. In fact, the Marshall Hall chaired Labour Commission report brought it up as one of the the solutions to the high cost of redundancy in Jamaica. In fact, it is the solution that we should really have. No, not a discussion of whether we should have unemployment insurance, but how do we pay for it and who pays for it? Because
but when I spoke with Kavan Gayle, he cited the case of the tourism worker and COVID. And he said now the tourism worker was laid off, no? If that layoff extended for more than 120 days, that worker would be entitled to redundancy. Where unemployment insurance would come in is that long before that 120 days, that worker would be able to get unemployment insurance.
Absolutely.
But then if at the 120 days, the hotel says this, no, we're not going to hire you again because we're putting some new systems and we don't need you anymore. The impression I got from him is that the redundancy will still have to be paid.
Well, this is where it has to be a trade-off. Given tenure and so on, because I don't think the unemployment insurance contemplates a situation where you work forever and ever. The redundancy laws, in Jamaica, they get costly to have people for the long term, but it's an accumulated benefit. So everything that we discuss would have to come to some sort of balancing act and some sort of negotiation. I mean, if in the current situation, redundancy only becomes due when the business is in trouble or workers have to leave. So the cash flow implication doesn't happen, but it happens all at once. If you have to pay, in the Barbadian case, I believe it's 0.75% of the wage goes to the unemployment insurance. That becomes a fortnightly or a monthly payment. So the actuaries would have to go to work. Jamaica is a mature society in some ways, and certainly in terms of industrial relations. If the political will is there to implement, I'm sure we can sit down and work out the balancing act.
How would you react to what Damien was proposing? And I hope I don't misrepresent what he was saying, but let me paraphrase. He was saying that, look, what you don't want to do now is to discourage employment, because if you discourage employment, you're going to be discouraging investment and so on.
And he's absolutely correct.
Hold on. So he says, plus, you have a bigger challenge in terms of how do you provide some level of social protection, not to the privileged formal sector employees alone, but right across the spectrum. And he's basically saying that my interpretation of what he's saying is that NIS, NHT, the whole of them works there. Rid the employment scenario of that, the labor market of that. Put that into your general taxation and provide social security protection that is targeted to those who need it most. And he's suggesting that social security coverage could include assistance if you are temporarily unemployed and so on. And he's saying that kind of direct spear fishing in terms of where you put your benefit is far more effective than trying to interfere with market forces.
Because I'm familiar with his point of view, and I share that point of view for many reasons, not least that it would be a stimulus to formalize employment. I mean, right here in Jamaica, you're familiar with the figures. When you look at the percentage of the workforce who pay PAYE, it is way below the number that ought to be paying. And it's not that people are inherently lawbreakers, but if the formal structure is onerous, people just work around it. It also is important to create that social safety net paid for by the Consolidated Fund for the most vulnerable, because it will speak to your workforce competitiveness, the cost of formalizing employment. As you well know, in the U.S., there's no redundancy. there's no maternity leave. I'm not saying for a minute that we must roll back maternity leave. It is how you pay for it. And if we recognize it's a shared social cost, it lowers the barriers to employment. And in fact, it should be a stimulus in producing more jobs and investment and jobs. So in the pure economic sense, I think in your column yesterday you say you can't change the laws of economics. In pure economics, it is the right thing to do. As I say, how we get there is how we have that discussion among in the tripartite sphere, capital, labor, and government. But it is the way to go.
But this suggests to me that this is the wider discussion that we're going to have. I mean, when the proposals for unemployment insurance are presented, and I assume there will be, Mrs. Coy said that she hopes to get it to Cabinet by next month. I imagine Cabinet is going to take that to Parliament and share it with the rest of us. But when that time comes, we're going to have a serious conversation as to whether or not this is the way to go. When I asked the union leaders, whether they had started a conversation with their members as to whether or not they are prepared to have any more of their little pay envelope encroached upon to finance the scheme, I get the impression that they haven't. They've been discussing it at officer level. But I don't know that the workers out there who are already complaining about all of these deductions that are coming out of the pay, I'm not sure if the attractiveness of unemployment insurance, particularly for somebody who's been working consistently for 10 years and never been laid off, I'm not sure that they're going to be so enthused about any more money coming out of their pay packet.
There won't be. But, the one important point we have to think about, not unlike what's happening now in terms of public sector compensation, rather than adding, we should really step back from the picture a bit and talk about social protection floor, the vulnerable, the cost of formalizing employment, and how do we put it all together to ensure that at the end of it, people don't fall below a certain level, people's tenure is respected, but also that the environment stimulates the creation of more good jobs.
Wayne, we're going to have to come back to this, they're giving me the wrap-up signal, I'm out of time. But I've got to arrange another a program where we focus on this broader picture because I think it's important and I think it's critical for us to try and see if we can build a wider understanding of these issues. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wayne Chen, President of the Caribbean Employers Federation. Today we've been talking about unemployment insurance. The argument don't done. There are many more aspects of it that we're going to have to explore. We'll probably wait until the PIOJ has submitted the report to Cabinet and Cabinet has shared it with the public. Then we're going to jump back into it because it has, particularly based on the discussions we had with Dr. King and now with Wayne Chen, it has some wider implications that we need to ventilate some more. Thank you very much for joining me. We'll be back here next week, Monday, to do it again, Jamaica Live, Bridge 99. Thanks to my producer. Thanks to my studio engineer. Thanks to all of the wonderful people here at Bridge 99.